Hey, what's going on, guys? Taylor Sharp, your host here of the Huddle Up Podcast. And look how we do things around here. Each and every day, I'm going to give you a different NFL topic. I'll put my own unique little spin on it. I'll give you my thoughts. We'll take comments. I love to interact with listeners. And on today's episode, I want to talk about Trevor Lawrence. And no, I'm not talking about the hit. However, since we are on that topic, I know they say, oh, don't do any fence sitting. I'm going to kind of sit on the fence on this one. Trevor Lawrence slid awfully late for my liking, and linebacker for the Texans, it was just an unfortunate situation all the way around. Was there malicious intent behind it? I don't know. I'm not judge, jury, and executioner here, right? No, I want to talk about Trevor Lawrence because what that concussion, which they've put him on IR, he's also going to have surgery to repair an AC joint. Now, it's on his left shoulder, so it's on his throwing arm, but by all accounts, his season is basically over. I want to talk about what that means for the future of the Jacksonville Jaguars with Trevor Lawrence. So, obviously, 4 years ago, Trevor Lawrence went number one overall, and rightfully so. He had an excellent year, college career at Clemson. We saw him win the national championship over Alabama as just a freshman. He played for another national title against Joe Burrow and the LSU Tigers in 2019. Now, he wasn't victorious in that game, but he had an outstanding college career. He came into college as the number one overall player in high school. So his entire life, he's had high expectations, and for the most part, he's lived up to those expectations. Except recently. Look, Trevor Lawrence came into this league with a lot of hype around him, and I give him a pass his rookie year. First off, rookie quarterbacks never historically super successful. And then you got to remember 2021, that was the Urban Meyer debacle. I mean, he's kicking the kicker in the hamstring. The entire locker room falls apart. I mean, he didn't even last an entire season over there in Jacksonville. Urban Meyer was an utter disaster as the head coach of the Jaguars. So I'm going to give him a pass on that. But look, in 17 games as a rookie, Trevor Lawrence, 59% completion, 3,600 yards, 12 touchdowns, 17 interceptions. So he struggled, but it's nothing out of the ordinary for a rookie, right? Well, again, they fire Urban Meyer, bring in Doug Peterson, who had won a Super Bowl in Philly, had a lot of success there. It was kind of a questionable firing when Philly decided to go into a different direction and ultimately bring in Nick Sirianni. So he goes from 3-14, he goes 9-8, he makes the playoffs. And remember, that's when they upset the Chargers. The Chargers had that big lead in the playoffs at halftime. It was like 24-3, 24-7, something like that. And the Jaguars came all the way back. They win that game, thanks in large part to Trevor Lawrence. He was outstanding that year. 66% completion, 4,100 yards, 25 touchdowns, just 8 interceptions. And again, all of that, that's just his passing numbers. We know Trevor Lawrence can take off and run when he needs to. Now, he hasn't had a ton of yards so far, but, I mean, he has 14 rushing touchdowns in 4 years in the National Football League. So he's no slouch. He's not your traditional pocket passer. I mean, Trevor Lawrence can make things happen, certainly, when he needs to. So you're like, okay, he got the first year jitters out the way. You're excited about the future of Trevor Lawrence. Maybe Jacksonville finally found their quarterback. You had that 1 year with Blake Bortles, but that was kind of the outlier. Last season, 2023, I mean, it was up and down, to say the least, for Trevor Lawrence. They finished 8-8. Now, he completes 65% of his passes, 4,000 yards, 21 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. So a little bit fewer touchdowns, and he also almost doubled the amount of turnovers. That's not including all the fumbles. High amount of fumbles for Trevor Lawrence, more so than a lot of quarterbacks in the National Football League. And then this year has been an absolute disaster. So the Jacksonville Jaguars, 2-10 overall, but Trevor Lawrence as a starter, just 2-8. 11 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 60% completion. So he had that really hot second year after shaking off the rust, getting the rookie jitters out of the way. He's gotten worse each of the last 2 seasons. Just 2,000 yards passing. Again, I mentioned a completion percentage, 3 straight seasons have dropped. Touchdown passes, 3 straight seasons have dropped. And he's turning the ball over at a lot higher clip than you want out of your franchise quarterback. Also, Doug Peterson has an issue as well. I mean, you look at Doug Peterson, his seat is as hot as any coach in the NFL. He comes in year one. And what does he do? I mean, he has that solid year. We talked about it. He goes to the playoffs with the Jaguars. But then he goes 8-8 last year, 2-10 this year, and it's all falling apart. I mean, it's not just one thing. So the problem is the Jacksonville Jaguars may need to move off of Trevor Lawrence, not just because of this injury, but because this is a concerning negative trend in all aspects of his game. The big problem, they can't. He just signed a 5-year, $275 million contract. He's one of the top 5 highest paid quarterbacks in the entire league. And I get it, right? He had the big year, the 25 touchdowns, 8 picks. He won you a playoff game. Last year was a little bit uneven, but for the most part, 21 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. You give him that big deal. This year's been a disaster. And really, the last half of 2023, all the way through 2024, it's been about a year and a half now where Trevor Lawrence has just looked like he might not be the guy after all. Now, the 2-10 record is important here. Because right now, if the season ended today, Jacksonville Jaguars hold the number 1 overall pick in this NFL draft. Should they take a quarterback? Maybe, but they're obviously not going to do that. They have way too much money tied up already into Trevor Lawrence. So what are your options if you're the Jacksonville Jaguars? You could go best available. A lot of people have a Travis Hunter mock to him or a big-time offensive lineman because that's what they need. You go look at the Jacksonville Jaguars offense, Trevor Lawrence at quarterback, Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby at running back, and then your receiver trio, which is as talented as any in the NFL. Brian Thomas Jr. has been excellent as a rookie. Christian Kirk's solid. Gabe Davis has did some nice things in Buffalo. You thought that would transition nicely over to Jacksonville. And then Evan Ingram, one of the best tight ends in the NFL. It all comes down to the big guys up front. They need offensive line help, so maybe they do that. Also, you could trade that pick. Here's some other teams battling for that number 1 spot. The Raiders desperately need a quarterback. They went from Gardner Minshew to Aiden O'Connell this year. The New York Giants, we know their situation. They've already cut Daniel Jones. They went with Tommy DeVito. They benched him. Now they're on their 3rd starting quarterback this year in Drew Lock. So where do you go from here? Do you trade with one of those teams? The problem is those teams know you're not taking a quarterback number 1 overall. Why would they not just sit at 2 and 3? Also, I mentioned Doug Peterson's record. If Doug Peterson gets canned after this season, which I fully expect to happen, you're going to bring in a coach that may very well have the number 1 pick, but no leverage to trade out of it. You have a quarterback that's getting paid a lot of money, and his on-field production has slipped drastically within the last 2 seasons since signing that big deal. It's going to be hard to find a coach that wants to take over this job. And then also, that coach is likely going to want his own quarterback, right? Now, again, Trevor Lawrence is attractive to a lot of different guys and a lot of different coaching candidates, but not so much now as he was 2 years ago. You have a quarterback with way too much money who's now injured. We don't know what his future holds because he's been injured a lot the last few seasons. You might have the number 1 overall pick, but no leverage. And really, I mean, you could take a Travis Hunter, but do you need a receiver? I mean, I just listed off the guys. Brian Thomas Jr., Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, all those guys under 30 years old. Brian Thomas Jr., just a rookie. Evan Ingram, solid. You need offensive linemen. Is there an O-lineman worthy? Can you trade out of that pick? What can you get in return if you do trade out of that pick? And let's say, okay, well, Travis Hunter's a 2-way player. You could put him at corner. You could, but are you going to take a corner number 1 overall? You don't see that happen a ton. So you'll have a quarterback that's injury-prone, that's production is dropping, that's on a huge contract, which limits what you can do in free agency. You don't have an offensive line and no clear path to get one, maybe in the draft, but, I mean, there's not a ton of great offensive line prospects. I mean, Will Campbell's up there, but he's kind of slipping into the late rounds. The guy from Texas is up there. He's going to go in the 1st round, but are any of these guys top 5, top 10 worthy? Borderline. It really depends on who you ask. So this is not just a Trevor Lawrence issue, even though I think that Trevor Lawrence has left a lot to be desired for anyone in Jacksonville. Let's say you bring Lawrence back. I don't think you're bringing Doug Peterson back. So which coaches would you go after? Obviously, the hot name is Ben Johnson. I mean, that's the name that everybody wants a piece of, right? What is Ben Johnson going to do? Zach Robinson for the Atlanta Falcons. He interviewed for a lot of different offensive coordinator positions a year ago. He's been good. Kirk Cousins hasn't done him any favors in Atlanta. We'll get into that in an episode later down the road. So again, one final recap. Trevor Lawrence, huge contract, suffered a season-ending injury, hasn't really been good in a year and a half. Doug Peterson, you need to let go of him. If you do, how attractive is that job going to be for someone? And you have too many holes to fill in this draft. and you might get the number 1 overall pick, which, again, great to get that pick. You're probably going to have to trade out of it. How much leverage are you going to have? How much are you going to get in return when teams know that you are not going to select a quarterback with that first overall pick? So the Jacksonville Jaguars have a Trevor Lawrence problem for sure. Is it performance-based? Is it contract-based? Is it injury-based? I think it's a little bit of all three, but it goes a lot deeper out there in the state of Florida. You got to move on from Doug Peterson. If you do that, who can you bring in? How attractive is the job? What are you going to do in the NFL draft with virtually no leverage? Well, we'll monitor the situation as the season goes along. The offseason is probably going to be really busy for Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars, but right now it is bad vibes in that organization. I would want no part of it if I'm a coaching candidate. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Huddle Up Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Next time, we'll maybe talk NFC. You know, the AFC, we obviously know every team's chasing the Chiefs, but the NFC seems to be a little bit wide open. I mean, you have the Lions at the top, but who are those teams that are going to grab those divisions? We'll talk about that next on the next episode of the Huddle Up Podcast.